Hey guys, today I've got a full deep dive for the Arcan Spark Sorceress build here in Path of Exile 2. This build is designed to get you through the early parts of the game, through the campaign, through Acts 1 to 3, roughly level 1 to level 40. As you go up above level 40 to 50 to 60, some more interesting combinations and skills become available to you. But early on, you're not going to have access to some of the crazier stuff that this game has to offer. Okay, so what is this build about? It is designed to be new player friendly, and as I said, to get you through the campaign. So early game, you're going to focus mostly on Spark. This is going to be your carry early game. Then as you get a little bit higher level, you can take Arc. This thing will be more of a single target chunk sort of damage. It does still chain. You can still make a chain. However, if you just want to spread lightning all over the battlefield for mob clear, the Spark is the way to go. The Arc down here is a little bit better for single target damage. Now, as you get a little bit further on into the game, you can use something like Lightning Warp, and I'll show you this later on in the video. This is a really fun to use in combination with Spark. However, you won't have access to this until a little bit later on, so we're not going to focus on this one early game here. So let's first talk about the player stats. I've gone for Energy Shield in my build here. This is going to enable us to have almost 1,000 total life points here if you combine the life with the Energy Shield here. Now, we don't have very high armor on the build. We've focused, as I said, on the Energy Shield and Energy Shield production instead. Obviously, armor is still a valuable stat to have, depending what you're doing. Either armor or one of the resistances down here is going to be essential. As you can see, I have 50% resistance on the build right now. Now, to get through the campaign, you don't really need super high armor or resistances. It is going to help in boss fights, especially, or if you find you're really struggling against one particular damage type, then swap out some of your gear to get more armor or more resistances, depending on what is required at the moment. However, as I said, for this build here, we're going to focus more on the Energy Shield as one of our main defensive options. As you can see, we have 60 spirit here, so I've actually got a little bit extra coming from one of the gear pieces. We'll get into the gear in a second, though. I'm mostly focused on intelligence. I did put a tiny bit into dex for one of the abilities that, one of the support gems specifically. As you can see down here, we have the energy recharge per second is 74. We could pump this up a bit higher, but the energy shield recharge delay modifier, this is 130%. So this is what I focus on now. Energy shield is going to be coming back very quickly here, and then we're going to get 74 points per second. Now, you can pump this up even more, but I wanted to spread some of my stats into spell damage and stuff like that as well. So we're not purely a defensive build. We have some defenses here that will enable us to survive. However, we then have pumped a lot of the rest of our points into spell damage, as I'll show you here. Spell damage all the way up the left side here. I've gone spell damage, elemental. Now, I've obviously chosen the lightning stuff from here. I've actually gone over to the left and taken this stuff in here. So energy shield, there's a few in here. 40% energy shield recharge rate. So some of these nodes are really valuable. But I've taken as many of the fast start energy shield recharge ones as I can get my hands on. Now, if we come down here on the right side, I've also taken maximum energy shield, faster recharge, faster start of recharge again. As you can see, I've taken a bunch of energy shield recharge type stuff. Now, the other stuff we've taken in here is cast speed, and I've taken a little bit of mana regeneration rate. This one in here is 25%, which is pretty good. If we go a little bit further up, I have started to come across here. Now, the reason I've started to come across here is more spell damage. This node in here is pretty good, 30%, but we've also have more energy shield stuff in here, and then we have crit, which is not too far away. So these are pretty good nodes. Now, you can see I've also gone up here for spell critical damage bonus and spell critical hit chance. Now, you don't have to go crit stuff early. I really like the idea of just spamming out critting, lightning bolts everywhere. So that's what I've done. You don't specifically have to go into crit. You can go higher into spell damage if you want. You could come up here instead and take more damage versus, exploited elements. So the more we do, 24% increased damage with hits against enemies affected by elemental ailments. So we're going to be shocking quite a bit. So you can come up here and grab all this extra damage as well. So this is pretty valuable. These ones are pretty valuable to take. So if you want to go harder into the DPS stats, you can totally do this instead. Or you can keep coming up here, and there's a whole lot of other stuff you can focus on. Here we have elemental damage, exposure, and all that sort of stuff. So there are some different options if you want to go a little bit harder into DPS, but I do think taking a balance between the energy shield stuff and your spell damage is a good balanced way to play through the campaign. Now, once you've unlocked your Ascendancies, I've just gone for more critical hit chance because I wanted to use the Elemental Storm, which triggers an Elemental Storm on critical hits with spells. This is the reason I've gone into crit. You could, instead, if you wanted to play it even safer, is go over here for Elemental Resistances. And over here, Heart of the Storm, 40% of elemental damage taken, recouped as energy shields. This is actually really, really strong versus anything that's doing elemental damage to you. So if you want to play it a little safer, you can take this route. If you want to go more DPS, you can come down here. Now, you could just go flat elemental damage and exposure as well. Those are pretty good choices. I've only got 2 points in here right now, so I'm just showing you what you can do with your first 2 points once you've done the Sekimar. The Trial of the Sekimas. I do actually have a guide on that on the channel already if you want to see how to unlock your first Ascendancy. Now, let's get a little bit more into the skills and stats and all of that sort of stuff. So I have this thing that rolled for me. It's only level 14, but it is still the best stuff that I've come across for this build. If I could find something similar to this but a higher level, I would absolutely replace it. But this thing rolled with 78% increased spell damage, 66 to maximum mana, plus 2 level of all lightning spell skills, and then we get also 6 life gained per enemy killed. So this is a really, really nice roll. This is why I have this thing on. So the +2 to level of the lightning spells, you can see how it has a little like blue sort of number, and some of them are higher level. This is taking advantage of the +2 from this. Now, the rest of my gear, I've honestly just put the best stuff that I have for the current build. However, this item is worth pointing out. You can get +30 to spirit. So we have an additional 30 spirit that we can use. So we're actually able to use 2 of the spirit gems at once on this build instead of just 1 early campaign. So keep your eye out for +30 to spirit roll, or just plus anything to spirit, really. I've seen it roll on the chess pieces thus far. I'm not sure where else it can roll. I've only seen it on the chess pieces, but that's not to say that it's only limited to the chess piece, all right? Now, let's talk about the boots. I've got these ones on. They are, again, a pretty low level, but they're the only boots I've ever had roll with 15% increased movement speed. This is the main reason I've got them on. Life regen is nice. More fire resistance is nice. Increased rarity of items is also pretty good. It comes with a little bit of armor and energy shield. So it's not super, super crazy for defense, but I've got it on for the movement speed. I think movement speed is really, really nice in this game, and I've only seen it roll on boots thus far. Okay, let's talk about this helmet. Energy shield, maximum life, and life regeneration. This is just a defensive item. Again, it's not a very, very high level item compared to my current level. So as you can see, you don't really need to have the highest level gear as long as it synergizes with the build that you're trying to do. Down here, I have this one, which is +36 to armor. Now, the only reason I still got this equipped is it's the only extra, basically one of the only things giving me extra armor on the current build here. It also gives us extra mana recovery from Flask, which is nice, but again, this is an item that I'm looking to replace here pretty soon. The gloves give us maximum life gain per enemy killed, as well as increased energy shield. Again, this is not the greatest item. This is just the best one I have at the moment for the build. In fact, we could probably try and replace that pretty soon. This ring, I'm currently spec'd out, as I showed you before earlier in the video, I'm currently spec'd out mostly for fire resistance. So, as you can see, this one has fire resistance, max life, max mana, increased cast speed is also really, really nice. A little bit extra intelligence and life per enemy killed is pretty nice as well. The amulet I'm wearing has mana regeneration, increased armor, maximum energy shield, maximum mana again. +1 level of all melee skills is pretty much useless, but we do have crit damage and life regen per second on here as well. Having some life regeneration options is nice. I'm finding that I'm never really running out of flasks. The only time I ever really ran out was during one of the boss fights early on when I was spamming it. I was spamming it a little bit too much. The other ring I've just got on, which has fire resistance right now. So let's just talk about the gear for a second in this game. The game is a little stingy early on with gear acquisition. I think they could buff the amount of gold you you're acquiring along your journey here. You can see I still only have 8,000. It was really nothing. The game is pretty stingy when it comes to gold. I think it would help new players quite a bit if they gave a little bit more gold so we could buy some more items along the way to replace some of the old items in our inventory here. The flasks are nothing special. I've just gone for high life recovery and high mana regen. This one I still have a cold resistance on. I honestly just still have this equipped because I don't have anything really better running at the moment. So that is the build. Now, as I said, you don't need to have super high level items as long as the items are actually contributing to what your build is. Because our build is mostly focused on lightning, spell damage, and energy shield. Anything that's increasing our energy shield is really, really nice. And anything that's giving us more spell damage, mana, or lightning is very, very valuable for our setup here too. As I said, the gear is not perfect. I could have better gear, but the game is pretty stingy on loot acquisition early game and gold acquisition early game as well. Let's talk about some of the early game skills you want to use. Is the Wall of Flame plus the Sparks. This is a really, really fun combination. Now we're in Act 3, so this setup is not necessarily the best for these particular enemies, but I'm just doing this to show you what the setup is. You put your wall down and you spam your spark out. It will collect the fire as it passes through, dealing significant amounts of damage. Now what you can then do is to add the arcing to it by putting this thing down. And then we go like this. And now it'll arc between the enemies in a significant fashion as well. Now the other one we are using is the arc ability. It's actually called arc, so don't get confused. The game will chain electricity between enemies on some of the abilities. And then there's a separate ability called Arc. So it's pretty easy to get those two confused. So what Arc does, it is more of a single target DPS type of ability. Now, it can still chain, but as you can see, it does much bigger single target damage here. And that is without any extra debuffs or anything going on. Now, you can also stand inside your orb, and then it will chain in a more significant fashion. You can see my elemental storm going off there as well. You can see just how sort of defensive we are. We can just sort of stand in the enemies here. Okay, we're here in a different level one that's a little bit better to show you what some of these abilities are about. Oh man, there's a lot of action right here. That is the warp in action right there. Man, it is super fun, but look at it. It's the graphics a little bit confused. Hey, look at that. I think one thing that's also worth pointing out is poison, I believe, is considered as chaos damage in this game. So if you're getting destroyed by poison, put on some chaos resistance. It should make a difference for you. Let's find some more enemies here. Let's see if we can get the warp happening on a bigger group. Here we go. Oh, we're out of mana apparently. Now don't be afraid with this sort of build to just spam your mana flasks when you need them. You will get your mana back super quickly. And there's that poison damage. I don't have very high resistance for poison here. So let's talk about these abilities and the passive gems that you might want to combine with them. So for Spark, what I really like doing is putting Conduction. So supported skills have 100% more chance to shock. And then I like to put on 40% more projectile speed. Now you could put cast speed on here as well. Depending on where you're at, if you're super early on in the game, maybe something like cast speed might you might run out of mana too quickly. But I do have 2 on here that increase the cost anyway, so it's much of a much. But I do personally really like this combination. I'm getting a lot of shock out on the field. And these projectiles are going to move around really fast. Again, if you're not going to go for crit damage, there's another one you can put on that removes your crit chance and just gives you flat extra damage at 30%. So that is an option as well. For the flame wall over here, now as you saw, I have the circle sort of one on here, which is Fortress. Spotted skills have 50% less damage, but the wall from these spotted skills create a circle instead. It's an interesting one to have on. You don't have to put this one on, honestly. You don't have to use it. I like persistence on this thing. Supported skills have 40% more skill effect duration. So it'll last out on the field for an additional 40%. So it'll be out there long. You can take advantage of it a bit longer. For the Orb of Storms, I like putting this energy barrier on. So this thing will recharge our energy shield immediately and is not interrupted by damage for 2 seconds when stunned while using supported skills. Since we're standing in our Orb of Storms quite a bit, we can take advantage of this time anytime we get stunned. Also, like putting, I just threw this one on for extra chaining. You could put this one on a different skill. It's totally up to you. I just threw it on in here to have an extra ability on my Orb of Storms. In terms of arc, I actually do like taking the chain off and putting it over here. You can do that instead. As you can see, there's a slot in here. Just depending on where you're at in the game. If you're using arc a lot, then I would probably recommend doing this. If you're not actually using arc that much, if you're still relying on spark for a lot of your damage, then you don't really need to consider that. You could consider putting this into spark instead. The other gem I like to use in this one is called Unleash. It does make your cost 1.5 times higher, so you will have to rely on your mana flasks a bit more. But what this does, it gives you a seal, one every roughly 2 seconds. When we unleash our skill, it will basically reoccur. The second version of the skill will do 50% less damage. It does make your overall DPS higher, but it will increase the mana cost, as I said. And the last one we've been using here is the Lightning Warp. I think this thing is super, super fun to use. It's available a little bit later on. So this is one that's going to maybe be active at the end of Act 2, beginning of Act 3, around that sort of time. I've put the extra area of effect on this thing just to make the blast really, really big. I actually have another slot that I haven't occupied with it yet. So you really couldn't put anything else you like. Any extra damage or anything like that, any extra chaining, anything like that is going to be nice on this ability. Just have to make sure that the gem you want to put in there is compatible. As you see on the left, supportable skills. So if you just hover over each one of these, it actually tells you which skills are supported. There's one other thing I want to talk about with this build, and is the fact that we have an additional plus 30 spirit from this chest piece that we're wearing. So by default, you actually start only with 10 spirit. There is a boss in Act 1 that can give you an additional 20 spirit when you kill him. So make sure you actually kill all the bosses in Act 1, and you should have 30 spirit. But with this, we actually have a 60 in total, which means we can actually use 2 of these passive sort of gems. Now, what do I have in here at the moment? I have the Arctic Armor, and I have the Mana Remnant. So Arctic Armor is a defensive one. So this will create one of these stages every 3 seconds, up to a maximum of 3. Then anytime an enemy hits you with a melee attack, it'll do a burst of cold spell damage. It can actually freeze or just totally shatter the enemies. Can be a really, really nice defensive option early. The other one we're using at the moment is Mana Remnant. So this has a 25% chance to spawn mana on killing a shocked enemy. Since we're going pretty hard into the lightning stuff for the build, you're basically shocking everything, right? So you're going to have a lot of these spawning, and it's going to increase your mana regeneration by quite a significant amount. Each remnant grants 59 mana. So as you're going, you'll be picking up these. You'll be able to use your spells even more often. I don't have any supports in these, as they will increase the spirit cost, and I've only got 60 right now to work with. So this is how I've spec'd out. I've got both of these on the build. Now, if you are earlier on in the campaign, as I said, I only recommend taking Arctic Armor first. This one is not really necessary. I think you get enough mana regeneration from your flasks in this game that it was never really too much of a problem. However, if you still find that you're struggling with mana regeneration, you can take some of these nodes out of the other places and go for mana regeneration speed. There is actually quite a bit of it in here. Here we go, mana. This one's mana as well. Mana regeneration rate. This is a big chunk, 25%. So if you're really, really struggling for your mana regeneration, just come into the passive tree and respec a little bit. There you go, guys. This is the build that is carrying me through the campaign. Now, I am taking my time. I'm not really rushing through to the end game or anything like that. I think this build can easily get you through the campaign. You are going to have to focus on your resistances as you keep going, and I think some more armor than what I currently have on the build will go a long way the further that you get into the game. I would keep your eye out for rolls of gear that have both both armor and energy shield, like this one, but this is only a level 12 item, so. But keep your eye out for stuff that rolls with armor and energy shield together. It's a good combination of stats to have on the Sorceress here. If you're really, really struggling for armor or defensive stuff early on, now you could potentially take some points out here and come over here. You are going to have to spend like 5 points just to get over here though, so I don't really know if it's necessarily worth it. But over here you do have some percentage armor value as well as flat armor. You do also have some pretty good stats over here. Stuff like mana and life regeneration is pretty good. Just some mana, max mana, and mana regeneration rate in general. So depending on what you're doing, you might want to consider coming over here. If you do want to take some minion stuff, there is some minion sort of things over here. But I think generally speaking, I think the early part of the game is pretty safe just to do some energy shield and spell stuff over here. There you go, guys. There is the Arcan Spark build here for the early game of Path of Exile 2. We will be back with a full end game version of the Sorceress here, probably in a couple of days, as I am still leveling up. So I'll catch you in the next video, guys. I hope you all have a fantastic, amazing day. Don't forget to drop a like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take it easy.